My name is Max Whitman. I work in Work Package 3, and I'll be sharing some of the work we have started in the eastern parts of Honduras, together with Neil Powell and many, many more. I don't know how to draw the boundary of everybody who's contributed to the work, but I'll be talking briefly about co-creating rural development through ecosystem restoration. Let's see. But I wanted to start it with this picture that I personally took out of the airplane. And what you're looking at is the pine savannas along the Mosquito Coast in eastern Honduras. And this is the wettest savanna in the world. But as you can see, it's not doing entirely well. It's black and it's very degraded. And it's also on the verge of becoming a grassland. And the main reason for this is continuous fires, but there's also a bunch of historical aspects connected to it with illegal logging and so on. But to make a long story really short, the Mosquito people who live in this landscape recently got their land title back, and they were seeking ways of reforesting these degraded lands. And it's really from the desire to reforest the land that the initiative grew. And what the initiative now has become is also a desire to use this restoration to address other development issues. So we are asking ourselves in this very complex mosquito context, how can co-creation in climate compensation initiatives contribute to equitable development? And this is a drone image we took when we were there, and this is how it looks several times a year. Massive uncontrolled fires. Now, plenty of legitimate concerns have, of course, been raised in relationship to the climate compensation movement. And I think we're all familiar with many of them. The greenwashing companies basically paying cheap labor in other places to get out of having to take responsibility at home. There's concerns raised against the contextual insensitivity, where projects sort of apply a one-size-fits-all frame and basically end up ignoring different ecological, cultural, and social uniqueness of different places. There's also been a bunch of papers drawing attention to the lack of transparency, as it's really difficult to sort of know what is the carbon market actually, and how is it related to reducing emissions. And this also ties into the fourth concern that I present here, which is the concern over carbon storage permanence. This is a tree plantation from Brazil. Will this tree plantation be there in 30 years, or will it have been logged? And the final concern that has a lot of traction in the literature is stakeholder exclusion and the inequity. So the power imbalances embedded in climate compensation that occasionally they see marginalized people suffer, losing their livelihoods, etc., in favor of plantations. Having said all of that, there is also a real urgency to restore these degraded lands that I just showed you a picture of from Honduras, rebuilding the biodiversity, rebuilding soil fertility, rebuilding all the natural capital that we have lost through industrialization, or in the mosquito context, a lot through colonization. So the question is not if, but it's for us rather how. And it's there that we think that co-creation has a very, very important role to play, because in theory, at least, it addresses many of these concerns that I just brought up. And I think the main thing that co-creation can offer us that's different is that it, by definition, refuses this blueprint. So to start with, it departs from a context. The local culture, the specific ecology, they become very, very essential part of any project design. So that's the first thing that it sort of addresses. But then there's also this focus on building relationship, which is really important to me. It's not coming and rolling over the locals. It's coming and wanting to do something with them on their premises. And similarly, building relationship with companies. and between those that are affected by climate change and those that are sort of inducing it. So opening up spaces to talk to companies about the effects of climate change and how it's important that they improve all aspects of their operations and that compensation is not enough. We also think that a proper co-creation process could support the local empowerment, work opportunities, education, infrastructure. Many things could be addressed using climate compensation if it's done in a way that fits with the local culture and the local ecology. And that really ties into the idea of co-benefits that we're working on towards also. We don't see, or we don't believe that you can see, if you want this to be successful and avoid these problems, that you can only look at the carbon sequestration. Can we identify synergies between the carbon sequestration, the biodiversity, livelihood, water retention, and so on, education? And the last part that's that makes it transformative to take a co-creation approach in this restoration space is that it's iterative by nature. It's not a 4-year project. It's not a 5-year project. It's a long-term commitment of at least 20 years. And in 20 years, a lot will change, but the co-creation needs to update the problem formulations, navigate all sorts of problems. And again, it avoids the blueprint, which is the most important thing. Now, I could talk about this a long time, but since we only have 10 minutes, I really want to try and get into what this means in the case that we are talking about in Honduras here, because it's so multidimensional. But to give you a feeling for it, I have a few slides with challenges and questions that have emerged through our work there and through the process. And the obvious place to start is with the initiative is that we look into fires and how we can control that because they undermine the integrity of the savanna, which is the foundation of life for many people in La Mosquitia. So what we have done together with different groups in this region is first and foremost explore the effects of the fires on the communities. How are they being affected by these continuous fires? But also exploring what would it mean if we would control these fires? What would it mean for the landscape? What would it mean for you socially and culturally? Is it something that we should even be considering? If yes, then how? And so on. Then we've also had many processes where we look at where do we control these fires? Where should we start? Is there a place where you would particularly like to start? And here, for example, there's interesting differences to sort of an expert-driven approach, where we in the project have identified that it's a good place to protect the catchment that supports the water flow to one of the main villages, which is sort of drying out by every year. And also, where and how do we expand? So this is a man from the local brigade, and it provides sort of an interesting example of the organization of this work, because the brigade are hired to put out fires and to build fire breaks and to try and control the fires in these areas. And to begin with, say we 10 people were hired, but the co-creation approach we've taken, they get to structure this as they see fit. And what we saw and what we found is also that in difficult times, they've been struck quite harshly by climate change. They've taken this brigada and they've split it up so that many people in the community would have an opportunity to work and to buy food, etc. So that means we're getting back into the co-benefit, letting the people design and develop plans and doing it iteratively based on what is happening in the region. So here's a fire break, another sort of example of the work that's been happening in Mosquitia. But as I said, we don't believe this project should be about carbon or about the ecology. So we have explored how can carbon be a vehicle for development in the region. Um, and it's really early stages of the process, but what has been expressed across the villages is that they don't believe that individual funds should be paid out to the families or to the different villages, but they expressed the desire to put up one big fund that could address more systemic issues. So questions emerged like, how can education benefit from this initiative? How can food security be strengthened through the project? How can infrastructure and market access benefit from these initiatives? How can the initiative support health in the region? Now, these are really wicked, difficult questions that have emerged through the co-creation process that we've run so far. And the fact is that we don't have the answers. And to me, that's exactly the point of the whole co-creation process, that the context is so complex, and addressing health in La Mosquitia is a really wicked problem. We need to incorporate as many perspectives as possible. So in general, we follow these sort of four frameworks of the co-creation process, which is we explore the challenges collectively, we support the social learning and the transdisciplinary research, so also research done by the locals, co-design the implementation strategies, the interventions, the processes, and the projects. So how should we control the fires? What should be the measurements, fire breaks, etc.? Co-design how they organize. That's the example I took with the brigade, for example. And then make sure to have a continuous process of we implement something, but it's constantly monitored, reflected, and adapted based on different ways of knowing. So biodiversity could be measured by scientists, but the social ramifications, you could have local people researching it, etc. So there are many aspects to this, but I like to end with something that I've taken to heart throughout my PhD so far, and that is that viewing the reforestation processes as relational rather than technical issue is really the difference that I think makes a difference, that makes us avoid those traps that I mentioned earlier. It's not a technical issue to reforest this. It's not a matter of drawing up a perfect designed process. It's about investing in the relationships, making sure they are strong, making sure they're built on empathy and care and so on. And that's really what I think could make it transformative for real. And we're seeing some of that so far, but it's still early days. Thank you.